and welcome to all our viewers from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC here at Gold. And with me here back again is the amazing, the wonderful Dr. Kathleen Kendall-Tackett. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you back. And this time you will be presenting for us in the Midwifery conference, right?
Yes.
This is, of course, a conference very dear and near to my heart. And it's wonderful to have you with us for this conference. And you are actually presenting the keynote for this, one of the two keynotes. So it's doubly exciting here for us. So for our viewers who might not know you that well yet, tell us a little bit about you, your background, your professional journey, and then after that, we will talk, of course, a little bit about the presentation. So too, of course. First of all, where in the world are you located?
I am in Amarillo, Texas, which is up in the panhandle part of Texas. So we're in the high desert. It actually does get pretty cold here. Our topography is very different than a lot of the rest of the state. We're about 6-hour drive from Dallas, and we're about 10 hours from Houston. So when people ask, I have an aunt in Houston. Do you know her? No, I really actually don't. But we actually now are experiencing a pretty mild winter, which is nice because last winter was very, very cold the entire season. So we're very happy for that. Every day that it's nice, we're happy about.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now let's talk about your background. You, of course, oh my goodness, you have such a wonderful, amazing background here from birth work to lactation, and you're also a psychologist. So tell us a little bit about yourself and all the wonderful things you're doing. You're an author. You have so much going. So tell us a little bit your background and also what you're working on now.
Okay. Well, I'm actually really excited to tell you a little bit about what I've got going on now. My background is in psychology. My training was actually in developmental psychology, but I made the switch to health psychology a few years in, just because I found that it actually reflected my interest a little bit better. I studied trauma. That's actually a big area that I study. And in fact, I was one of the founders of the American Psych Association Division of Trauma Psychology. So trauma is something that has always been a really central part to any of my work. I started in the family violence and sexual assault field back in 1983. So I've been doing trauma work for a long, long, long time. For the last 8 years, I've been the editor of our journal, Psychological Trauma. And that is actually, first of all, being involved in the trauma division, and then also being involved with the journal has actually given me a much broader perspective on trauma than I had before, because, what we kind of discovered when we were starting the division to kind of encompass all trauma psychologists is, like many fields, we were very siloed. So you had the people who did combat, and veterans work. We had people in my field, like interpersonal violence. And then you also had people who worked in disaster mental health. And so it was like these very kind of different areas, but all fitting under the umbrella. And that's actually been really valuable and really relevant to the thing that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation, because, some of the things that I've discovered actually is because I'm very interested in birth. Birth has been a huge part of my work for the last 32 years. It's just been so central. And the idea of like looking at birth trauma in parents and mothers, but also looking at it in terms of, that kind of naturally evolved to also looking at what was going on with providers, and it's like those two are so related to each other. But one of the things that I noticed that was so incredible is, as I was reading, articles that we were doing for a special issue on trauma in the military, and there's this construct that's been, the last 10, 15 years, you see it in the military literature, is this construct called moral injury. And what a moral injury is when you are either forced to participate or you can't stop an action that is wrong. So if you think about that in a combat setting, that would be somebody who sees, like a war crime and they can't stop it, or they see somebody getting really hurt and they can't do anything about it. And they've actually found that the acts of omission, the things that you actually can't stop, actually seem to be even worse than the acts of commission where you actively participate. Well, so I'm reading this literature, right? I'm going through and looking at these articles that we have in our special issue, and all of a sudden it just hits me like this in the head. I thought, this is actually talking about birth. I actually couldn't believe it. And I don't think I would have known that if I wasn't using Cheryl Beck's qualitative research all the time. But the things that the nurses were describing, I feel like I failed my patient. My patient was counting on me to protect her. I thought that's a moral injury. That's not secondary trauma. And so Cheryl and I actually just recently teamed up on an article where we looked at a lot of her qualitative data that had originally been called secondary trauma. Okay. Because that was really the only framework back when she did it in 2012. And I said, that really, I think, is moral injury, and so we basically kind of outlined and made the case for that. So that's one part that I think is like super important, because it's like, it gives a name to something that a lot of people have experienced.
Right.
But they don't have words for it. They don't have a way to describe it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I've actually been looking at is looking at the burnout literature, and it's like that has also evolved. And we've seen a lot of current research, kind of post-COVID, because that's where it's really become very thing. And what you really see is like, if you really want to describe it as a way, is it's like, I think we could almost call this birth in crisis, because so many providers are affected by either burnout, or they get secondary trauma because they've observed a traumatic event and they get PTSD themselves,
Right.
or, this related construct, moral injury, and it's kind of like moral injury and PTSD, they overlap, but they're not identical. And that's what actually researchers have been discovering, is like, they really do need to be kind of separately addressed, because PTSD is more like the danger and fear, and moral injury is more like the guilt and shame. That's a real good way to kind of separate it. So that's actually kind of like how a lot of like my areas of interest, my interest in trauma, my interest in birth, my interest in kind of like looking at the mental health of providers, all kind of came together. And so, I'm actually using a lot of the literature that, was in Cheryl's and my recent review. It's right now, it's so hot it's not even off the press yet. It's actually still under review, but it's like super, super new studies. And it's, to me, really thrilling to actually be able to, I'm so happy I got a chance to present this stuff.
And I'm so happy you're doing that with us here at Gold. So a super new material,
super new material
and fresh material. And, it is so true. You talked about, a trauma and your journey in researching it, working in it, how you saw trauma, traumatic birth, post-trauma, also, of course, birth injuries, all this kind of things related to the family that can happen, to the baby that can happen. And, but also that now we're looking at the care providers impacted by that. They're not just like doing things and they're seeing a situation and are not impacted by that. They're suffering. And I think this kind of acknowledgement that is new, because we always feel like, okay, the healthcare providers, they need to know what they're doing, they have to be in charge here, and it's almost like guilt and shame involved in that. If a healthcare provider said, what, that really shook me. I don't know if I can, what to do with this. I can't go on. And it's very hard to admit that, because even amongst colleagues, to say things like that, because I'm like, well, are you not confident? Are you not competent? What is it? So it's a very complex and difficult topic to even talk about, right?
What's interesting too, is like, there's almost like 3 different cultures around this, depending on what profession you're in. Like if you're in nursing, it's kind of one thing, if you're in midwifery, or if you're an OB. But there's a similarity about the fact that, if you don't have a way to talk about this, that actually you're going to be much more likely affected by it. And the biggest thing that came up in all the studies, and I couldn't believe actually how consistent it was, number one source of support was colleagues. That's actually even above, partner, above friends. It's like, and if that workplace support isn't there for you, then it's really, you're going to have a much more likely to have a miserable time. And, the thing is, as we were talking during the break, I would like to appeal to people who work in health systems and say, look, this is a real employment issue. You really need to be thinking about this, because what happens is either it compromises quality of care. It absolutely does, and it's like, or, like the person puts themselves at so much at risk to provide the good care that they, sacrifice a lot of other things. The other thing is, it really relates to staff retention. It's very
Right.
expensive to hire somebody new. And it's like, this is, they need to be looking at their bottom line here, because
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, if I can't appeal to their conscience, I want to appeal to their budget, and think about it like in terms of like, this is a customer satisfaction and a quality of care issue, because if you've got so many people that are affected by this,
Yeah.
and in some systems, it could be 30-40%. That's high. That's unbelievably high. But the
Yeah.
thing is, I've known about this for a long time, because I've been speaking at conferences on this for the last like 25 years. And I will tell you, pretty much every time I present on this, I hear stories,
Yes.
because I'm going to conferences and I'm talking to nurses, I'm talking to midwives, I'm talking to doulas, and they have all experienced this.
Yes.
And it's like at one point, there's a lot of times it's just, it could be a single incident, but it could be multiple. There could be a single provider who's a real problem, and it's just, I mean, this is such a pervasive issue.
Yes. And you made a very good point how important colleagues are, and the system feeling, being supported, being there. So many leave, so many, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
retention issues, because they feel like they have nobody to turn to. They
Right.
don't know what to do anymore. And then just the only option they see is leaving. And
Right.
instead of having support trainings, being there, having a debriefs, how can we make the
Hmm.
system better. You're right. We could change. There's huge
Hmm.
potential for change, and
Yes.
it's very smart of you to say, okay, if we tell the systems that this is affecting their bottom line,
Right.
that's what they're looking at. Maybe we are able to make a change. Maybe we are able to affect something if they seeing that, yeah, this really hurts our bottom line if people
Yeah.
are leaving or people are dissatisfied, and the care is not that great, because now we
Right.
know that families are demanding a different kind of birth. I
Right.
mean, we've seen this, and which is a positive and wonderful things, that women and families say, enough, I don't want to be strapped to the bed
Right.
anymore. I want to birth, I want to
Right.
labor how I want, and I want to labor in the water and whatever. So because women and families are demanding it, there
Hmm.
is change, right? And so,
I
but
hope. I
if
hope so.
yeah, and if we see that our midwives, our doulas, our
Hmm.
L&D nurses, if they're so burned out that they can't be there with women, we want
Yeah.
to be there with with the
Yeah.
family, and they're so traumatized that they're just mechanically doing their work.
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned this customer satisfaction. These families
Mm.
will say, no, we don't want these people being at our
Right.
births. There, we don't want robots. We want somebody warm, compassionate, empathetic. But you can only be that in your profession if you have support, if you know
Absolutely.
that you're kind of being taken care of too.
Yeah. And it's I remember actually several years ago reading an article, and it was about first responders.
Mm,
And first responders, let's face it, I mean, their work is really difficult. I mean, they see the worst of the worst.
yeah,
They show up at car accidents, they show up at, shootings, they show up
shootings.
domestic violence. I mean, just awful stuff. But they said one of the things that made a difference, and I thought this is what made me think that this was really important, is they said that if the workplace was supportive, that the providers actually took pride in their work. They
Mhm.
felt like that they were providing a valuable service, and that even though it was hard, if they had a chance to talk and debrief, and really just discuss it with colleagues,
Yeah.
that they actually tended to not get burned out, that they actually felt that they were doing something good and positive, and they had a lot of satisfaction in their work. And
Yeah.
satisfaction, actually, that's one of the things that we know that protects against burnout. It
Mhm.
doesn't protect against secondary trauma, because that can happen in a minute, but it
Yeah.
does protect against burnout. And it's like, if you like what you're doing, if you like your colleagues, and if you feel like that they are a source of support to you,
Mhm.
even when things are difficult, and even when something awful, but unavoidable,
Mhm.
like you lose a patient, either a parent or a baby, even if you lose something, have something like that happen, that's just really serious stuff. If you feel like you've got good support, and even if a mistake was made,
Mhm.
that there's owning of that, and a kind of like okay, how can we do this better, instead of you were wrong, you did the wrong thing. And that was
Mhm.
actually one of the articles that had a big qualitative piece for OBs, was talking about that.
Yeah.
And I said there's kind of different cultures between nurses and midwives and obstetricians, in terms of what kinds of ways they manage their own, I guess would be the best way to say it.
Right.
But, many nurses have actually told me, going back to the labor and delivery nurses, they've said, what has made things hard at times is when they see something horrible,
Mhm.
and they're told to just get right back into the next room.
Yeah.
like nothing happened,
Nothing
and
happened.
they said that just solidifies it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, Kathleen, I mean, I would love to talk for hours here because there's so much to unpack. But I tell you, your presentation titled Burnout, Compassion, Fatigue, and Moral Injury in Prenatal Care Providers is really the presentation for everyone in this field. No matter if you're a doula, a birth worker in any kind of capacity in the hospital, out of hospital, you're presenting wonderful research and, that, and of course, also maybe what we can do, in the future. You hinted to it, and that will be also in the presentation. You're not just leaving us hanging, giving us definition, but also what is there for us that we can take hope with us. And the wonderful part is here, Kathleen, this presentation is absolutely open access, absolutely free of charge for everyone to enjoy and learn from. And so I'm so glad that you will be part of this. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I'm so glad you mentioned doulas too, because even though we don't have the research on them as much, we do actually I have so many personal stories. I've spoken at so many doula conferences over the years, and I know their experience is very, very similar. So it's like, I will definitely be acknowledging doulas too, because they do such an important work, but they can't sacrifice their mental health to do it. It's not fair to ask that of anybody. So it's like, I really am kind of hoping we can start having some conversations, and I'm hoping change happens, because I think as more and more people are talking to each other, I think it's going to force a change.
Yeah. Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And Kathleen, you will speak twice on that day, and that will be February 22nd. So no matter where you are in the world, what time zone, you can be part of this. And to our viewers, if you aren't able to come to the live, everything is always recorded. So make sure you sign up for this free presentation, and then you can also enjoy the recording of this. And if you want to find out more about this presentation and all the other wonderful presentations in the entire conference, we have the Gold Midwifery Conference of 2022 here starting February 1st. Please visit goldmidwifery.com. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Kathleen. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. See you on the 22nd.
Yes.